All right, in this video, we are going to actually start a whole new unit all about ecosystems. Now, I've pushed out this set of notes in our OneNote, and I've created a new section in OneNote called Ecosystems and a new page there called Parts of Ecosystems. Now, I'm going to go through a quick version of these notes. Now, everything that I'm talking about can be found in the Discovery Ed tech book. And to get there, go through the portal and then go to the parts of ecosystems that's in the Unit 4 Energy Flow in Ecosystems. But I'm going to just kind of go through a quick version of it. If you want to watch more videos or see more details, reading more information, please go do that. That is encouraged. That'd be wonderful. But I'm going to kind of jump into some of the key things that are in our notes. So the first one is simply how we define or how do we refer to the things in an ecosystem. So living things are biotic. And just like biology is a study of life, bio means life. It's a prefix meaning life. And just like if we had a prefix for not, like incorrect, in is a prefix for not, the a is a prefix for not. So abiotic means not living. And non-living things were never living. If something was living and now it died, it is still biotic. Even though it's dead, it's still biotic. So let's do some categorization. Right? So we have a few examples here. One of them, or a couple examples of coral. So we have a coral here that is living. And actually, let's rename that to be biotic. And non-living is abiotic. So coral, biotic. The sun never was living. That is abiotic, right? And we have a different type of coral. And so that coral here is biotic. Dirt is never was living. So it's abiotic. Blades of grass, those are living, right? Biotic. Trees, a forest, biotic. Water never was living. Living things need water, but water itself never was living, so it's abiotic. And then we have earthworms, those are biotic. And the sky or air, or even like we could say temperature, is abiotic. So our abiotic things would be the sun, dirt, water, and air or temperature. Those four things are key, and I'll refer back to those later, but those four things are abiotic. So we have organism dependency. So all things need each other to survive. And unfortunately, the circle of life, some things don't survive because other things need to eat them to live, right? So we eat things to gain energy. So we're going to make a very basic food chain here. So the first thing is we have a set of plants, right? So these plants are the first thing, and we would call those producers. Now those plants, so this would be one. Now those plants then could be eaten by a caterpillar. So that would be a consumer. The consumer eats a producer. And then this smaller bird would eat the caterpillar, and then the hawk would eat that other bird. So we could see a transfer of energy going from the plant to the caterpillar to the little bird to the hawk. And those arrows, we point in the direction that the energy is flowing. And that's a big deal. And we'll talk about that arrow a little bit later on. But hearing and seeing it now is kind of an easy, basic catch to this, right? So let's look at how healthy ecosystems are balanced or what makes them, right? So ecosystems are made up of biotic, and again, we call those living things, and abiotic are non-living. But the proper verbiage or proper term is biotic and abiotic. But an ecosystem are made up of biotic and abiotic parts which they have to interact. So without that interaction, we don't survive, right? So biotic things are the animals, the plants, the insects, the birds, the grass, all those living things are biotic. Now, abiotic again, non-living, water, air, sunshine, temperature, dirt, never were living. Now, all of those abiotic factors create a habitat. And those habitats provide all the things an organism needs to live. Food, water, and shelter are the three things that a habitat provides. Now, decomposers. Those are the things that break down waste and dead organisms. Without decomposers, the world would be really kind of creepy and gross. I mean, think of if every fall we have the leaves of trees that they fall from the tree to the ground and they pile up. Without decomposers, we would have all these leaves continue to pile and pile and pile. When you cut grass, those little blades of grass fall on the ground and they decompose. Now, common decomposers are worms and mushrooms, but most of our decomposers are too small to be seen without a microscope. So when you think back to our microscope study that we did in the lab and all those microorganisms, some of those are decomposers. They were breaking down the algae and other dead things in the water. So in a balanced or healthy ecosystem, a variety of living things have the resources they need to grow, survive, and reproduce. So without having all the things in an ecosystem to eat, things wouldn't grow. Without having shelters and things that they would need to survive in, things would die out. So they need a balanced or healthy ecosystem to survive. And without other organisms of that species, they could not reproduce to repopulate in that area. So it doesn't mean unchanging. A balanced ecosystem doesn't mean unchanging. Species still might increase, or after a while then they can decrease. So that's EASE. Yep. All right. So think about this. If we had more rainfall in an area, then we might get more plants. Now, with more plants, then we might increase more frogs in an area. More water and more plants, we might end up with more frogs. Now, with more frogs in an area, well, what eats frogs? Well, snakes might eat frogs. So we then could end up with more snakes in that area because we have more frogs. More frogs because we have more water in an area. So if the more rainfall, if we had less rainfall, we would have less frogs, and less frogs would then result in less snakes. And the frog and snake population would adjust based on after the frog population decreased, then the snakes would probably have to go someplace else. If they didn't go someplace else, then they stay and they die. That's just all part of the beautiful circle of life. That if an organism doesn't have food in an area, they have two options. They either move to go find more food, or they stay and they can die. Now, all organisms have a niche and a habitat. Now, a niche is the role an organism has in an ecosystem. So deer did not sign up for a job. I mean, deer kind of roam out in woods and field kind of spaces and forests, but the deer, they eat plants to survive. That's what they want to do to eat and survive. But what they're actually also doing is helping control a plant population. So without the deer, then we would have an overload of certain types of plants. And that's kind of also why we have different seasons, like hunting seasons, that help control some of those animal populations. Because if we had too many deer, then they actually would eat too much of the plants, and the plants would then die out. So there's kind of this balance of when things are hunted or not, or plants, if we had too many deer in an area, they could overeat And then the deer would eventually either die or they'd go find someplace else to live to find food. But by that point, they may have eaten all the plants that we have in an area. So all the relationships in an ecosystem help keep it balanced. Again, going back to some of our predator and prey, owls eat mice, and the mice population will then decrease. But then this causes the owl population to decrease because there aren't any mice for the owl to eat, which then causes the mice population to increase if the owl population decreases. So it's, again, a balance, kind of like a teeter-totter. Now, what can happen if ecosystems become unbalanced? Well, if we remove, so let's change our color, new kind of topic we're talking about here. So if we removing one thing can cause changes to all the living and non-living things. Birds wouldn't have a home if I removed a tree. Insects then wouldn't have a place to feed if I took a tree out. Soil held in by the tree's roots could wash away. And I know in 4th grade you talk about erosion. And those roots actually hold down dirt. And then, of course, trees, they produce oxygen, which is another reason. Think about grass. If you didn't have grass in an area, then the roots of the grass that hold down the dirt, they could wash away because of rainfall or wind. So all these little things you may not think like, oh, it's not a big deal, but they really have an important role in that area. They have a niche. Plants have a niche. Keep dirt down, right? Now, if I introducing a new species to an ecosystem can actually throw it out of balance. And we call those things invasive species. So these invasive species are things that aren't originally from that area, and they come in and they can actually crowd out other species, causing them to find a new home or they die. Some of those invasive species are like plants, and there are some ivies out there that they are brought in. They're not native to Indiana, or they're not native to United States or to North America, and they actually grow, and we don't have animals that eat those plants that grow, those ivies. And the ivy can just continue to grow, so we have to cut it out if we don't want it to overpopulate, shade another plant, and because plants need sunlight, and those ivies grow, and then they shade out others, and then they get all the sunlight to survive. So limiting factors, this last category here. Now, the carrying capacity. The carrying capacity, and think about this. If you were carrying a stack of books, if I gave you a book and you were holding it in your hand, all right, no big deal. If I gave you 2 books, no big deal. 3, a little bit more. But if I kept adding one more book into your arms, you eventually would have to adjust your stance. And if I added more books, you would have to adjust your arms. And then if I kept adding you more books, you might have to, adjust your stance even more. And eventually I'd hit a point with how much weight you can hold, and you would drop the books. The same concept applies to a habitat. The carrying capacity is the number of organisms that can live in an area. It's limited by the food, the water, the space, and the shelter in that space. So if overcrowding happens, organisms must move to another area to live. If they don't, they die out. Same thing. If I kept giving you books, you had to adjust to be able to hold them. But eventually, I hit your carrying capacity and you couldn't hold anymore. Same thing. If I added more deer to an area, then there would be too many deer for the plants to continue to grow enough to feed the deer, and then there would be a point where their plants couldn't keep up and they would die out, and then the deer don't have any food, so then they have to go find a new place to live or they die. So I know that this is kind of a new concept, but again, it's one of those that you can start observing ecosystems all around us. Look out your windows and start noticing different birds, different bugs, but start identifying plants, and which are we call producers, and consumers, the things that eat those plants, and our decomposers. And we'll break down more information as we go through this new unit on ecosystems. But this is just a quick intro to it. Again, if you want to see more information about ecosystems, go to our Discovery Ed Tech book. There's more readings here, some videos that you can jump into, but let me know if you have any questions as we start our new unit.